would like to welcome everyone attending the first Radha Burnier Memorial Public Lecture on her 7th death anniversary. It is the desire of the Indian section to continue to organize a public lecture every year around 31st October in fond remembrance of Theosophy's beloved daughter. There are very few people alive who were close to Radhaji, as she was fondly called. One such person is Brother Pedro Oliveira, the education coordinator of the Australian section of the Theosophical Society. Brother Pedro had interacted with Radhaji over a long period of time, some glimpses of her life and influence, the subject of his talk today. Brother Pedro has a unique ability of making every subject he talks about very interesting, and he intersperses with intelligent humor. We could not have found a better person to talk to us about Radhaji. While Brother Pedro will talk to us in detail about Radhaji, I have been asked to get the ball rolling with her brief introduction. She was born in the Theosophical Estate at Adyar, Chennai, on 15th November 1923 into a Theosophical family. She is the daughter of N. Sriram, who was the 5th president of the Theosophical Society, and Srimati Bhagirathi Ji, who was also an active member of Theosophical Society. Her grandfather, A. Nilkanta Sastri, a civil engineer by profession and a Sanskrit scholar, was an early member of the society and much inspired by the founders of the society when they first came to India and Madras. Radhaji pursued an academic career at first and obtained a MA degree in Sanskrit. Later, in 1984, she was awarded an honorary degree of letters by Nagarjuna University in recognition of her distinguished contribution to the advancement of learning and the promotion of human values. She never used the title of doctor that was conferred on her. She joined the Theosophical Society in 1935 when she was only 11 years old, and became actively involved with its activities from 1945. She was a born leader and became president of the Youth Lodge, Adyar Lodge, and the Madras Theosophical Federation in succession. From 1954 to 1959, she was the assistant director of the Adyar Library and Research Center, founded by Colonel Alcott, and its director from 1959 to 1980. She was married in between to Radha Burnier, a Swiss national. She was a great exponent of classical dancing and had acted in movies like Himmat in 1941, Hamari Kismat in 1949, and In the River in 1951. Radhaji was elected as the 7th International President of the Theosophical Society and took office on 17th July 1980. She was elected to her 5th 7-year term in 2008 and has traveled widely for the Society's work all over the world, delivering talks and lectures to members and the public, inspiring all those who wanted to lead a noble life based on unity and brotherhood. Radhaji has occupied a special place in Adyar. She loved the place and cared for it like a mother. She ensured that the estate was always kept green, beautiful, and serene. She always had concern for trees, plants, and animals. She is known for highest intellectual acumen, intuitive wisdom, and deep insights into aspects of life. She was a perfectionist to the core and totally self-abnegating and very sensitive to the sufferings of others. Radhaji was a true theosophist as she practiced what she preached. She spread the spirit of universal brotherhood, lived a simple and saintly life with dignity, clothed in simplicity, and was totally dedicated to theosophy, the Theosophical Society, and human regeneration. Her life was a saga of hard work, selflessness, and service at the altar of divinity. In one of her many visits to Bhavnagar, Gujarat, we had hosted her at our house for about a week. One evening, my younger sister and I got to talk with her about J. Krishnamurti, and we saw how her eyes lit up. She paid glowing tributes to Krishnaji and told us about several incidents when the two of them were together. I had once asked if she would have a chemist's formula for good meditation, which I told her was very difficult to do properly. She said, just remain alert, aware, and observe. If the mind wanders, which is just natural, bring it back to the point you are concentrating on or to thoughtlessness. Keep on doing this regularly, day after day, preferably at the same time for a fixed time. I still remember her simplified words on meditation. Radhaji was a voracious reader of philosophical literature. The fact that she was trained as an excellent dancer and had even acted in movies showed the wide spectrum of her talent. She was meticulous to the core and cared for details. She knew the details of every place where the Theosophical Society exists in the world and a lot about the members running the Theosophical movement in various places across India and the world. She had a magnetic personality that would draw people from all walks of life towards her. She lived by the teachings she learned and reflected them in every aspect of her life. Let us now hear about the glimpses of Radhaji's life and the influence she wielded over the Theosophists and people in all walks of life from Brother Pedro Oliveira. Thank you, brother.
Of introducing Mr. Pedro Oliveira, because he is widely traveled and well known in the Indian section. Either way, I will go through the formality of introducing him. Brother Pedro Oliveira was born in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1957. He holds a degree in philosophy from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. Having joined the Theosophical Society in 1978 in Brazil, he has worked for it since then in several capacities. He served as the International Secretary at the Society's International Headquarters at Adyar, Chennai from 1992 to 1996. He has worked as the Education Coordinator of the TS in Australia, President of the Indo-Pacific Federation of the TS, and more recently as Officer in Charge of the Editorial Office at the International Headquarters. Oliveira has lectured extensively in many countries on the perennial wisdom, spirituality, mysticism, and comparative religion. He is the author of N. Sriram, A Life of Beneficence and Wisdom. This is published by TPH in 2009. And another book, CWL Speaks, C.W. Ledbetter's correspondence concerning the 1906 crisis in the Theosophical Society. This was published in 2018. His articles have appeared in a number of societies' international journals. I heartily welcome him and request him to please deliver the lecture. Thank you.
I send hearty greetings to Brother Pradeep Gohil, General Secretary of the Indian Section, Brother Pradeep Mahapatra, who is the convener for this activity, and to Brother Narayan, and to all the participants. I am sure we do also have an overseas participant here, which I can see. I only see his forehead. I think it is Brother Jayananda Hiranandani. If we could lift the camera a little, then we could see him. He lives in California. So all of you have met a number of you have worked with Radha ji and have read her writings. So what I'm going to present to you, it is just reminiscences of my work with her and my conversations with her as well. I would like to start with a very striking reminiscence. We had a World Congress of the Theosophical Society in Brazil in 1993. That was in July 1993, and before the Congress, the Brazilian section organized a press conference in which took place Mrs. Radha Burnier as president, Mr. Surendra Narayan as vice president, Ms. Joy Mills as a member of the General Council and former president of the American section, and I was acting as a translator. So there were quite a number of journalists there and in the auditorium, and one journalist who had done his homework about the history of the TS, he asked the following question to Radha ji. He said, Mrs. Burnier, I have read in the book Old Diary Leaves that the founders of the TS were in contact with the masters. What I want to know is the present day leadership of the TS in contact with the masters? And what is your, Mrs. Burnier, contact with the masters? Now, he spoke in Portuguese, and I said to myself, I'll have to translate this. And therefore, the reaction will be unpredictable. Because, you know, she was a very private person. Never once, I would like to put this on record, never once Radha ji spoke about her spiritual or occult status. Never. And she was following a very noble tradition, because when people speak about their so-called occult or spiritual status, the ego in them is still alive, isn't it? I'm reminded here of Sri Ramana Maharshi. An American journalist came to interview him before he died, and this journalist had never seen a photograph of Sri Ramana Maharshi. So they took him straight to the dining hall where Ramana was having his meal together with other residents in the ashram. And they gave him the seat of honor just opposite Sri Ramana Maharshi. So he asked Sri Ramana Maharshi, where is Ramana? And Ramana Maharshi, I have a theory that I would like to share with you. Whenever you ask a question to a wise person, you have to be prepared for self-demolition. Because a wise person does not function within the parameters of the personal self. So when this man asked Sri Ramana Maharshi, where is Ramana? Ramana pointed to his stainless steel plate with his initials on it, because every resident of the ashram had stainless steel plates with their initials on it. So the journalist didn't understand that kind of response. So a devotee took pity on this man and said to him, he is Sri Ramana Maharshi. So this American journalist, a bit brash, then asked Sri Ramana Maharshi, but why didn't you tell me that you were Ramana Maharshi? So Sri Ramana Maharshi looked at him and said, because this has no name. The Atman, the true self, has no name. It is unconditioned consciousness. So I translated that question to Radha ji about the present day status of the leadership of the TS in their contact with the masses and her own contact. And this was her reply. I'm being verbatim here. She said, Imagine a couple for whom their relationship is almost sacred. Would they talk about it? The relationship with the master is much more sacred than that, and therefore one doesn't speak. That was the end of the press conference. Now, this journalist was quite insistent, and later on he asked to interview her for his magazine, a national magazine on spiritual and occult subjects in Brazil, very popular at that time. And she agreed. I had again to act as a translator. And the very first question he asked, probably this is typical of some journalists, they call it icebreaker. I hope you understand this expression. He was trying to create a conversation, an atmosphere for a conversation. And he asked her, how would you describe yourself? What are your interests? So when I translated his question to her, she replied, I am one of the very few people in the world who is interested to know what the self is. And this poor man, I could see the initial panic in his face because he didn't expect this reply. So this is just a kind of a preamble to say that Radhaji's mind didn't operate within the parameters of self-interest or superficiality and so on. Her mind had been trained to go very deep into things. And when she gave a talk, if you were listening to her, at some moment of that talk, you could feel that the atmosphere is something very profound, and that atmosphere would stay with you for some time. So she was able to convey what very few people can convey, a sense of depth, but also a sense of inspiration. Now, I personally believe that she was also a very good student of the Bhagavad Gita. And you know very well the chapters in the Bhagavad Gita that describe the sage of stable mind. Forgive me my poor pronunciation of Sanskrit, Sthitta Prajna. So I asked her once we were having a meal together, and I said, Radhaji, there is this expression, Sthitta Prajna. I know that the word prajna is translated as sometimes as consciousness or mind or intelligence. But what is your definition of sthita? She said, immovable. A sage of stable mind, a sthita prajna, never succumbs to the onslaught of experiences. He or she remain the same. That mind doesn't get enmeshed in the whirlwind of experiences. That mind remains the same. And therefore, and because it remains the same, it has the capacity to act clearly, even during moments of crisis, which she did, during her tenure as president of the Theosophical Society. Of course, you know that every leader develops critics. It's part of life to have criticism. Sometimes the criticism goes overboard and becomes a personal attack, but also is also part of life. And she could hear the criticism and not become agitated. Now, some little remembrances or reminiscences of her as a child. In the book in the short biography of N. Sri Ram, her father, you will find a photograph of her, her father, Sri Ram, her mother, Bhagirathi, and her brother, Vajra, at Adyar when she was very small, probably 4 years old. If you look at that photograph, and if you look at her eyes, even at that age, she had that fierceness in the eyes, which she probably brought from a different incarnation. I cannot speculate, but there is this fierceness, this strength in her eyes. Now, she was a little girl, she said. She was a student of the occult school. And she said that after the school was out, she used to walk back. I think Brother Raghavan Harihara Raghavan can correct me. I think the family lived in Vasantalaya at that time. So she walked back from the occult school, but on the Besan campus of the compound, there are some very large wells, and she said that she and other students, they delighted of looking at the wells. They would stand at the edge of the well, and those wells have held the TS in good stand for several decades in terms of storage of water. But her interest as a little girl was to look at the depth of the well and so on. So even at that age, she was cultivating this capacity for awareness. She said also that she was the students. I don't think she was there because she wasn't on a different. It was in a different year. But she said that an American theosophist, at the invitation of Dr. Arundel, his name was Felix Layton. Some of you may have heard of him. She said that he was invited to teach at the occult school. He arrived at the Madras airport and his suitcase was lost. So he had no clothes. So they gave him some Indian clothes and he turned up at the classroom wearing a dhoti. And when the students saw this American man wearing a dhoti, they couldn't hold their smiles and even laughter. And she said that Mr. Layton also enjoyed that very much. I had a number of conversations with her about the occult school back in the early 90s. And one of her struggles, and I was there when she was doing this, was to extricate the occult school from the financial grants from the central government, because that created for the occult school a very serious problem. That grant allowed the central government to appoint teachers for the school, and most of those teachers had no interest in the TS, no interest in theosophy, and that created a problem because the ethos of the school was not being observed. So she worked very hard to create funds for the school. Eventually, the school ceased to receive grants from the central government. She also worked in many other areas. Brother Gohil mentioned in his introduction how she was one with the compound at Adyar. And she applied this ancient Sanskrit word to Adyar. She said more than once, she wrote about this in my conversations with her. She also said this. She said, Adyar is an ashram, and it has to be treated as such. And she would say that in the very ancient days in India, ashrams were built in natural surroundings because the natural surroundings were an integral part of the learning process in the spiritual life. So she had an uncommon knowledge about plants. Sometimes she would dispense with her driver at 5 p.m. at the end of the working day, and she would walk home. Sometimes I would walk with her, and she would make mental notes, and the next morning she would tell the superintendent of the garden departments which plants needed attention and which things needed to be fixed in the garden. She told me more than once that Krishna Ji had told her, you know, Krishna Ji started visiting Adyar again in October or November 1980 after she was elected president. They were good friends, and he started visiting regularly. And one of the things that he said to her was that Adyar is a sacred place, and you must look after it. And she said, and I consider this to be my duty, right? So I don't have the time or the inclination to go into the whole history of the Krishnamurti movement and what happened in 1929. This is all part of history. It is part of, it is written in books. But from her, I learned that Krishna Ji had a very good disposition towards the TS, and he never forgot what Dr. Bezan did for him. Towards the very end of his life, he still would call her Amma, which I think is translated as mother, right? Because she was in fact a mother to him and to his brother Nityananda. So he told her this, that Adyar is a sacred place and you must look after him. That when he came in his car, not his car, the Krishnamurti Foundation car, they walk all the way from the main gate to her house, and several people accompanied them, including Mr. Surendra Narayan and many, many others. I think I saw Amarnath Rao in the photograph, and also Mr. R. Gopalaratnam and so on, and many, many others. So they reached her house, Parsi quarters, and she said to me, I had prepared some orange juice for Krishna Ji, but too many people came. So while Krishna Ji got real orange juice, the others got a bit diluted orange juice. So that's how she addressed the situation. And then she said, Krishna Ji wanted to visit the Garden of Remembrance. And this is something remarkable. The last time Krishna Ji had been at Adyar was for the funeral of Dr. Bezan in 1933. She died on the 20th of September, 1933. He went there, and then he stood at the gate and he said, something is not right here. What kind of ceremonies are you doing at Adyar? And she said, well, we have Masonic ceremonies, church ceremonies, and so on, regular meetings. He said, no, it's none of this. Has anything been changed in this Garden of Remembrance? She said, yes. During Brother John Coates' presidency, they moved the pillars that were near the six-pointed star to the entrance gate because the architect thought that was more aesthetic. Krishna Ji said, that is wrong, because under those pillars were magnetized jewels. You see, later on I discovered that he also maintained this practice. He magnetized jewels for each one of his schools. He learned this either from Dr. Bezan or from C.W. Lalibita or from both. He never spoke about this, but those who were very close to him, they knew that he also maintained this practice. So, and she said to me that was true, because when they were trying to move the pillars, they were digging to lift the pillars, and they hit metal, and they discover metal containers. And when her attention was brought into this matter, she said that you shouldn't have done this because within these containers are magnetized jewels. And of course, the moment you touch them, the magnetism goes. Many people also criticized her because they said that she was emphasizing too much of Krishnamurti in her writings. Actually, she told me that a theosophist from France once, after a talk, said to her, "Why do you only quote Krishnamurti in your editorials?" And of course, you see, Radhaji was not shy in replying directly to people. And she said to him, "I don't quote only Krishnamurti. I quote Jesus, I quote the Buddha, I quote Annie Besant, I quote Lao Tzu. Why do you want me to quote only Madame Blavatsky, for example?" So, in any case, one of the great strengths of the society is its eclecticism. We are not forced to believe in A, B, or C, or D. We as students, we should pursue those studies that we think are relevant. But the society says the only thing that we ask is that you don't try to impose your beliefs on others. So she took the criticism that probably because she was perceived to be too close to him. But she was also able to speak to Mr. Krishnamurti itself in a critical vein, out of respect, but in a critical vein. She said, he was, in his videos, his lectures, talks were being filmed at that time, and he kept saying, "By Jesus, by Jesus." So she came to him and she said, "Sir, your talks are being recorded. If you keep using this expression, in the distant future, among those who never met you or knew you, they may believe that you are a Jesus devotee." He immediately stopped using that expression. Another thing that she told me is that she taught Krishnaji the real meaning of the Sanskrit word mantra. And she said to him, mantra is a composite word. Man means to think. Tra means to protect. And therefore, mantra is that which protects you from thinking. He was very interested in that because he had studied how insidious self-centered thought is. It destroys awareness, right? Not only self-centered thought, self-centered opinion. Winston Churchill is reported to have said that a fanatic is someone who cannot change his mind and never changes the subject, which is very similar to what he was saying. So we had quite a number of conversations about him, and I remember we were having lunch in the house of a former general manager of the TS, she said to us during lunch, I had the opportunity of asking Krishnaji the following question. She said, in some of your talks, you have said in the past that the masters may not even exist or that they may not be relevant, but we do have documents here in our archives that testify that you had seen them. What do you have to say? she said he didn't want to say anything. The only thing he said was, and she said, I was referring to the two masters behind the foundation of the TS. And he said, they were two of many people, implying that he was aware of the existence of other elder brethren as well. And that was the name of the general manager was Ranjit Tolani. So this was another important aspect of her life. I never had the impression that Radha Ji was a blind devotee of Krishna Ji. She always had this capacity to observe things as they are, to confront things as they are. I must also say something about the atmosphere of her office. A number of you must have visited her office at Adyar, and you may give your own testimony. She created this very serious, sublime, lofty atmosphere. When you walked into her office to talk to her after the secretary said that you can go in, there was that atmosphere of seriousness, but it was a blend of seriousness, dedication, and inspiration. She was there writing letters or editing articles and texts and so on. There was always this very beautiful atmosphere. It was very simple, very simple. I remember that when I had to help her to buy a CD system. The CD had come into vogue at that time, and she wanted to listen to classical music. So that was installed, and a special cupboard was prepared to install her CD system. But she didn't use commercial television at all. We did watch some videos there. She did invite some of us, a number of us, to watch the film The River in her house. She had received a kind of digitized copy, or it was a very good copy from the producers. She said some things about that as well. I'm sure I'm not breaching with any of her confidence in saying this. She may have said that to other people. She was a young woman at that time, a very stupendous dancer, and her dance in that film was nothing but celestial, dazzling. And the producer came to her when she was selected for the role, and Radhaji said, well, as you know, I have crooked teeth. And then the producer said, Radha, they addressed her by her name, Radha, because of your crooked teeth, we cannot start filming until we fix your teeth. Now, even as a young woman in her mid-20s or so, this was her reply. You will take me as I am or not at all. And the producer was very taken aback, but there was nothing he could do. So she told me that they had to arrange certain angles of filming her that would not show the crookedness of the teeth, to abide by her desire. She didn't want to have any particular treatment at that time, just to appear in the film. She also told me that she attended with the director, Jean Renoir, a very respected movie director. she attended the premiere of the movie in the main theaters around the world. She toured the world. And then she said, I knew how to live among those people, but that's not my lifestyle. My lifestyle is in Adyar, but I knew how to live around them. And I seen some photographs of her together with the director, an old man, on the first row in some of the theaters. She said that after that film, Mr. Sri Ram invited the director, Jean Renoir, and his wife to live at Adyar, to visit Adyar. And she said that he spent 2 or 3 months at Adyar. And after that, she said, he decided not to make films anymore. He was very impressed with the atmosphere of Adyar. She had, as you know, a very particular devotion to her father. Her father was a fundamental influence in her life. And her father, she said, was rather shy. Well, I never met him. Some of you have met him. He was rather shy, unassuming, but she said, I was convinced that he was an advanced soul, but he never ever spoke about himself. Isn't that extraordinary? He never ever spoke about himself. And then in 1956, when he was very ill, the doctor had asked her to prepare herself for the worst. And again, they were living in, I think during that illness, she brought him to live in Parsi quarters with her because Mrs. Bhagirathi had died. And he was very ill, and I think Dr. Shiva Kamu was looking after him during the night, and she was looking at him during the day. So early in the morning, she would come to allow Dr. Shiva Kamu to go to her house and bathe and having some breakfast and so on. And she said that she was rather dejected because death was imminent. And then she said, there was one day in which the house was full of benediction. The house, there was this enormous influence in the house, pervaded the entire house. She said she couldn't see anyone, but she knew intuitively that Master K.H. had been there, visiting him. And from that date onwards, he started to improve. And he lived for another 17 years. She was totally dedicated to him. And she said that, for example, there were a number of people who were close to Krishnaji. Sri Ram was not personally close to Krishnaji, but he was close to his teachings. He was investigating his teachings, not just his teachings, theosophy as such. And I'm sorry to say, in this day and age, we still have people who keep reprimanding Krishnamurti that he shouldn't have dissolved the Order of the Star and so on. And Radhaji was the view that by doing that, he shook up the tree and he helped members to realize what our essential duty is. And her father also understood this. If you see what is written in the book, what he said, particularly in the View to All India Radio, there was a specific question about that. And he said, I think that in discovering Krishnamurti and training him, Mrs. Besant and CWL are being guided by some high spiritual sources. And one of the points that makes it very difficult for the cynics about Krishnamurti and about Theosophy and the TS is that if you read his final statement in February 1986. This is in Mary Lutin's book, The Open Door, or The Life and Death of Krishnamurti. In the very 4 days before he died, he was very ill. He was dying of pancreatic cancer. He was on morphine, you know. And he asked his secretary, I need a tape recorder. And the secretary says, Krishnaji, you are on medication. Perhaps it's not wise for you to make any statement. And the biographer said that Krishnamurti summoned all his energy, and he said, as long as I am alive, I am the teacher. Bring the tape recorder. And of course, this young man brought the tape recorder, and one of the most extraordinary statements was made, and he said for 70 years, he was dying in 1986, February. He said, for 70 years, the super intelligence has worked through this body, but now the body cannot work anymore. You will not see this intelligence again in hundreds of years. And then he said, you don't know what you have missed, that great emptiness. And I found that statement very relevant because when His Holiness the Dalai Lama gave the memorial lecture about Krishnamurti in January 1995 in Vasanta Vihar, some of you were there. His Holiness the Dalai Lama compared him as if he was the capacity to go into the depth of things. Of course, from the Mahayana Buddhist view, emptiness is not just nothing. Those great saints and arhats of that tradition say that there is no difference between emptiness and compassion. Anyhow, so there are other things to say about Krishnamurti, but I think this is enough. I would like to conclude by saying that her presidency of the TS was of enormous effect. I was a young theosophist in Brazil, and I was translating every one of her Watchtower notes for a number of years. And I would say to myself, what she's saying here is very relevant. Which poses the question, what is the nature of a mind that sees what is relevant, what is important, not only for herself, but for the institution, for the world? It has to be a mind that has purged itself to a great degree of the sense of self-importance, or of the sense of opinionatedness. To use a Sanskrit word, I'm not a Sanskrit student, but some words I remember. It is a mind has weakened to a great extent the sense of ahamkara. You know, this sense of I am important, what I say is important. That is very untrue. So I was also there. One of the greatest blessings of my life was to attend the Human Regeneration Seminars in Holland in 1990, July 1990. And it was there, she had a conversation with me, and she said, we need more international speakers on the world stage, and I think you can help. So I will ask Mary Anderson, a secretary of the European Federation, to organize some talks for you and so on. I said, well, but my English is rather poor. And she said, well, but you can be understood. And so I was there, and it was incredible because there are something like 60 or 70 people in the hall and from different countries. and her subject was only this: human regeneration. And how she conveyed this sense that the objects of the society and the work of the society are geared for this. The objects of the society do not exist to placate people. You know, they are not a pastime. They are not an intellectual ornament. They are real. They are vectors towards regeneration. And that's what she said to us. And one of the things that she said that was unforgettable is that the first object, and there are several views about the first object, was the first object, universal brotherhood without distinction, is a mind without barriers. That's what she said. So brotherhood has nothing to do with belief. It has nothing to do with ideology. It has nothing to do with intellectual acumen. If we understand what brotherhood is at a very real sense, then the mind changes. She was also a very helpful person. She helped thousands of people. And she told me that her father, Annie Besant, before she died, said to her father, "Here is some money. I want you to organize so that regularly some help goes to the poor people in this area and other areas." And she continued that work. They helped many students, people with medical problems, and so on. When I had this rather difficult event in my life, I was working at ADR in August 1992. I received a phone call from Brazil, from my sister, saying that my mother had died rather suddenly. Now, I didn't have enough money to buy a ticket immediately. The allowance that we received at that year was slightly austere. So I came to her and I was rather concerned, and she said, "Just wait a minute." So she called her travel agent. Her travel agent communicated to her the cost of a ticket. She took her bag and took her purse, and she wrote a check for 62,000 rupees in August 1992. I tried to repay that when I came back. She said, "No, I won't accept any. It was needed to be done." So her contribution to other people as well, and very ill towards the end of her life, she said, "I wanted to settle my affairs before I go." And of course, then we discover later on that her money was completely donated to ADR and so on, to its work, so what is her name? A former treasurer of the TS, who was Radhaji's executor, Keshwar Dastur, she said to me, "You come by my office. I have something for you. Radhaji has left something for you." So when I arrived there, she gave me this brown envelope. So I opened the envelope, and inside the envelope was a stole that had belonged to Brother Sriram. So it's now here in my house. It was very, very kind of her. And I will end with what she said to me on almost my very first days at IDR in March 1992. She said, I am signing the notices of your appointment to the different departments here. But before I do that, I have to tell you something. Because you are occupying this office at a relatively young age, I was 35, some people may flatter you. Now, my English was poor at that time. I may have understood some people may flatten you. Now, both things happen. So, and then she said, but remember this, no matter what people say, you are what you are. And I think that this is the aphorism for this incarnation that I have to meditate on and realize. Thank you very much.